Japanese folding screens were often made in pairs. The screens are movable and can be changed to fit the occasion or to reflect the seasons. The Gardner Museum's screen paintings combine sensitive beauty with the nobility and dynamic heroism typical of the late 16th through 18th century shogunates. Perhaps this painting was commissioned by a daimyo, a leading samurai, or a rich merchant emulating his social betters. Given this background, it is no surprise the painting was purchased by the Boston aristocrat Isabella Stewart Gardner. The grapevine leaves are highlighted with gold leaf. The soil and clouds use real silver paint. But this painting does not show the usual, and also very expensive, malachite and azurite pigments seen in similar paintings of the period. Conservators immediately suspected that the dark green background was a later retouching or overpaint. When the surface is examined closely, one sees countless paint losses. The gold leaf has been abraded. The grapes show uplifting and flaking. Besides the original paint flaking, the overpaint is now dried and is pulling off the original paint layers. After the panels were separated, one of the paintings was removed for further investigation. After examining the inside of the panels, the conservators found that the paper used to make them was recycled, a very common practice given the high cost of paper at the time. This high-quality paper was originally used to document the inventory for a mining company. Since one of the documents was dated September 1897, the last remounting must have been done a number of years after that date. The painting was purchased at auction in 1902 from Matsuki Bunkyo, a well-known Japanese art dealer in the Boston area, and accessioned in 1903. Mrs. Gardner might have been advised on this purchase by her friend William Sturgis Bigelow, a connoisseur of Japanese art, and a trustee of the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston.
Though we have determined the date of the recycled paper inside of screen to be from 1897, we still don't know whether the last restoration was done before or after the purchase of the painting in 1902. The undercoat panels were also repaired rather than replaced by new ones, which leads me to think that the last restoration was more likely done in this country. There were several Japanese restorers already living in the Boston area around the time of Mrs. Gardner's purchase. Yamanaka Sadajiro, a well-known Japanese art dealer in New York and Boston, had on his staff a restorer named Murakami Sajiro. Also in 1907 and 1911, two more Japanese restorers came to work for the Museum of Fine Arts Boston. Actually, Mrs. Gardner has asked one of them, Kinoshita Yokichi, to repair other screen pair, rice cultivation. I have seen some of his restoration work, and he was rather conservative. And I don't believe he would do exclusive overpaint like this.
Cleaning test was done with ultrasonic mist and cotton swabs on the vacuum suction plate. The cleaning test caused the dark green dye overpaint to bleed through the paint and paper layers and onto the verso into the suction plate. Layers of putty or gesso layers with large particles then appeared, since the particles did not go through the paper to the opposite side of the painting. The conservators tried to remove the putty layer and succeeded in revealing the surface of the malachite pigments and hidden leaves. However, the cotton swabs started to pick up the original malachite as well. It was clear that in order to show the beautiful surface of the malachite, aggressive cleaning would be required, which would then pick up a significant amount of the original pigment. The paint chips and cleaning cotton swabs were sent to the Scientific Research Laboratory of the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston.
We examined chips of paint from the painting, and these chips were prepared as cross-sections, and then these cross-sections were examined with an optical microscope. We also used an electron microscope to help us identify the different pigments. Another purpose of the analyses was to identify the binding medium and the adhesive materials, and we used a variety of chromatography techniques as well as FTIR microscopy to identify the binding medium.
A cross-section of the original paint layers reveals heavy, large particles at the bottom and fine, lighter ones at the top, with a white pigment mixed in, which is the normal structure. A cross-section of the overpainted area shows that there are two different overpaints. One is a blue dye, which is easily soluble in water. This overpaint has a binding medium called dextrin, often found in the modern Japanese paint palette, and which causes cracks in cupping. The other overpaint layer is gesso, or putty, added by the previous restorer to disguise the flaked areas. This layer could be common household paint putty. The entire surface was overpainted with dye at first. Then gesso or putty was applied to flaking areas before being covered with the blue dye again. If the dye is removed, the original malachite is revealed where there's no putty layer. But there is a risk the painting will also show the white putty, which is not possibly removable without disturbing the original and which will cause the paintings to appear uneven. The challenge to the conservators is to apply a controlled amount of water for consolidation of flaking paint and clean enough of the painting so that its gold, silver, and even its overpainted surface will look cleaner, but without losing so much of the dye that the white gesso layer is too prominent. The museum staff and the conservators had to make a very difficult decision. Should they risk the original materials in order to show the original intention of the artist, or conserve current materials for a possible future attempt with now unknown but better techniques? The museum decided that the conservators should not remove the overpaint, but should preserve both the original and the overpaint. The first step in the treatment is to remove decades of accumulated dust with a brush. Foreign accretions, such as fly specks and other stains, are removed mechanically. The separated paint layers are re-adhered with a stronger binding medium to remove surface traction cracks. Areas with cupping are softened and flattened using an ultrasonic mist. Chalky paint particles, including on the overpaint, are fixed with an isinglass binding medium. After a few weeks of drying, the paintings are removed from the panel. They are moistened in the rear, and the paper and old adhesive are relaxed, and the painting laid face down on the surgery table. The layers of old lining paper are removed. Where the glue was thick, the lining paper was removed fiber by fiber. When the conservators came to the final thin layer of the lining, the original underdrawing was revealed.